it. So, okay, welcome everyone. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks clicking in here in the next couple of minutes, but we always share the recordings. So if they miss the first minute or two, it's probably fine, and we'll be respectful of those who are on time. I'm Paul Siegert. If you've been on these before, you've heard my intro before, so I'll keep it short and sweet. My background is a little bit unusual. I was a Russian intelligence analyst for the NSA as my first job. They gave me some paperwork to prove it. Had a fun time doing it, but eventually needed to get a normal job and have a family, which I did. I've got 5 kids behind my head. Went to work for an insurance company to get a normal schedule. Saw pretty quickly we had a great business model. We could increase our clients' costs every year, not tell them why, and there wasn't much they could do about it. That made me want to do something about it. And along that journey of discovery, I made some really great connections. And one of those was with Gary Bender, who started the CFO Solution to share best practices amongst CFOs. And we cooked up an idea to create a virtual chapter of that group, essentially, that we call the CFO Forum. So glad you're here. Happy to share with you today, and really to let Gary share with you today. My role is more so as a help coordinate all of this, but happy to do it and excited to spend more time with you and with Gary. So Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Paul, thank you very much. And for those on camera, I'm not on camera because frankly, I get distracted looking at 20 slides in 60 minutes and trying to smile and watch the chat room. So Paul does a lot behind the scenes, but I loved his introduction. Believe me, I don't have all the answers. We basically created CFO Solution 8 years ago to educate other private company CFOs and controllers. And along the journey, we decided to start writing things down, and we wound up meeting best practices, and Paul's one of them. So we always do, in theory, we do 2 29-minute executive summaries of topics that we have spent hours and hours on as a working group of CFOs in Eastern Pennsylvania. We have between 35 and 45 CFOs and controllers who get together and share best practices, bring in experts, and then we document them. And frankly, here we document them in a rapid fire means. And we invite you to go to cfosolution.org. Just go to the PCS portal. You can find it in the upper corner. And for those of you on Macs and other devices, as of today, we hopefully have the password eliminated, so you can just get in and surf around the site and find these slides, but more importantly, find the slides that dig into the detail. And always feel free to call me or email me to ask me more. And ultimately, I'll introduce you to the expert, because frankly, as my wife tells me, I'm a mile wide in knowledge and a 1/4 inch deep usually. So with that, we're going to talk about 2 topics today. The first one is how to use payment data. And Paul will run the slides here. But payment data is what your credit and collection person uses. It's your Dun & Bradstreet data. Most of you use D&B, and you get information on a prospect or on a new client, or a client that all of a sudden stopped paying their bills on time, and you use D&B information to try to figure out what's going on. We're going to talk about best practices and how you can use that information on not only your customers, but also in your prospects, and also on your suppliers, and even on your competitors. And we'll just talk about a couple of things here. We'll go rapid fire. First of all, payment data is compiled by Dun & Bradstreet or CreditSafe or a few others around the world. They basically have certain vendors that report how often you as an SIC number or EIN number, how you pay your bills. So ironically, they don't talk, and by the way, I'm a CFO of an engineering company. So they don't talk to all of my vendors. They don't encourage all of my vendors to report if I pay on time or if I pay late. They have certain vendors they buy data from. So first of all, it's interesting to understand that generally they grab their information from utility companies, telephone companies, and basically build an algorithm on how timely you pay your bills. They also reach out to certain very large vendors and ask them to share their payment data, and they actually buy their data. So for example, if you do business with Grainger or Staples or somebody that sells to all kinds of companies, Grainger's a good example, Staples is a good company. There's industrial suppliers that they gladly sell their data to Dun & Bradstreet or Credit Safe. And so as a result, your credit score depends on maybe five of your suppliers reporting how often you pay your bills. And frankly, if you were trying to manage cash and keep your credit score high for whatever reason, if you just kept the phone company, the gas company, the power company happy, and somebody like Staples or somebody like American Express or Visa happy, you could slow pay your other suppliers and keep your credit score high. So it is not the holy grail of every invoice, every bill you pay or don't pay on time. So that's where payment data comes from. If you're looking for international payment data, it is much, much slower. So we're the example I gave you a second ago about utility bills, phone bills, people like Amex and Visa, corporate cards, those happen every month. And they start to see a pattern. If you start to slow pay, they'll know it in 60 days. If you've got international clients or you're paying bills internationally, it takes much longer for that information to filter its way back to Dun & Bradstreet's databases. And you're very, very lucky if payment data from second world companies, call it Europe, Japan, are within 90 days of accuracy. So they're 60 to 90 days slower than domestic information. And if you're in third world countries, if you're in Africa, certain parts of Asia, China, a lot of that data is 6 months old, and a lot of it is sketchy on a good day. Frankly, DNB is a US company. Their international data is slow. Conversely, Credit Safe is a European-based company who we work closely with for our international clients and CFOs, because they're a European-based company and they actually have a different method and a much faster method to get international data. So they're very strong in Europe, Middle East, and China, whereas DNB is very strong with their model in the US. So that's a little background on payment information, where it comes from. Now the question becomes, why as a CFO or even a CEO, how could this data help you? So before we talk about how it could help you, I'd suggest the best practice is, do you even understand your own payment data? In other words, today or at the end of June or the end of July, when you close your books, do you see a profile of your AR? In other words, you've got $1 million of AR. Do you know how much of it is current in the 30 to 60 day bucket, 60 to 90 day bucket, over 90 days? What your exposure is, what your write-offs have been year to date, what's a normal write-off level, and are your reserves adequate, or is this something you look at the end of the year and try to figure it out before the auditors or the bankers ask you? We would suggest the best practice is that you keep this profile, you look at it monthly, you report it quarterly, you build out a 2 or 3 year trend, and then rather than, as most of us do, we're all humans, most of us can explain why we're over 90 days and why that write-off was rare and why it'll never happen again. And honestly, if you got to, and most people in this call know that, a bill that's 60 days past due probably has an 85% chance of getting paid. A bill that's 95 or 100 days old, that percentage drops to 75%. A bill over 120 or 150 days old, that bill drops to 30%. And lo and behold, and that's because the customer has a fundamental problem in their financials, or you sold them a lousy product or lousy service, and they're just not going to pay you. And frankly, they don't care if you cut them off, because they've cut you off from a procurement standpoint and they've moved on to somebody else. And you're going to have a hard time collecting that. And unfortunately, that's when, and myself included, I'm raising my hand, you can't see it, that's when we get the collectors out and start going after placing liens. And it's the back-assward way of doing collections. So first of all, build out best practice, build out the profile. What you'll learn from looking at that profile over 8 or 12 quarters. If you're starting to look at slow pays, you're starting to look, is it certain customers? Is it certain parts of the country? Is there a common denominator where frequently it's a salesperson? Okay, where they're either telling them to ignore the terms on the invoice, you can pay us in 90 days, or that the salesman is chasing weak credit prospects because he's getting paid on sales, not on collections. So first of all, physician, heal thyself. Look at your own data, figure out what it tells you, and then figure out what you learned, what you're going to change. So I'm on slide 6 now. You might have to change your contracts. You might have to do credit evaluations up front and really understand credit evaluations. Let's face it, if you ask for 3 credit references, they're going to give you 3 people where they pay their bills on time. So it's kind of asking your mother to write your performance review. She's going to give you high scores, whether you deserve it or not. Start to monitor new accounts. So you set up a new account, you bill them weekly, not monthly, and you start to see if they're paying in 30 or 35 days. And right up front, you develop a relationship between your invoice person and their payables person to make sure they got the invoice. It has the information that they need. It's going to the right address, and then all the appropriate paperwork is attached. That's going to solve half your payment issues. But now let's go back to the topic today. Is what would I use payment data for? So first question is, you've got a funnel of sales prospects. Salespeople are out beating the doors. You're trying to find all the potential clients you can. And at some point, you may or may not do a credit application. Some point, you may use credit data to validate that. And you go back to what I told you. If you're using Dun & Bradstreet, you're basically checking how frequently do they pay their credit card bills or telephone bills. I got to tell you, if I'm in business, the bills I always pay are my credit card bills and my utility bills. Last thing I want to do is have somebody shut off the lights or shut off the cell phone service, because that puts my company out of business. I'll pay those bills before I'll pay a steel supplier or an office supplier or a piece of leased equipment and pay that monthly lease payment. If I'm managing cash, I manage it reasonably intelligently. And you do the same. So again, you're doing a credit report. I basically told you the DNB reports telling you how quickly they pay their utility bills and their credit card bills. If you're looking at an international prospect and the product is going to be shipped internationally, you're looking at sketchy data, and you might have to figure out a way to get paid locally so the money gets in your hands quicker. And you have local invoicing and a local contact to follow up that speaks their language in their time zone. You might have to go to that effort. You might have to go to credit insurance. It all depends what your sense tells you, what your background checks tell you, and all due respect to either your sales team or your distributors around the world, your BD people. They're there to sell product. They're not in the business of collecting invoices. So don't exactly trust your salespeople, and your sales administrators have worked out all the details of getting paid. Again, so now you've got a credit report that's a little sketchy. It's based on sketchy information, and you may or may not be using it. So at a minimum, have a credit application and use payment data, and you might use payment data from 2 sources. I would recommend you have a DNB subscription, and you have a credit safe subscription. Here's what DNB is going to tell you. Oh, if they're not a customer, we don't have payment history on them. So if you try to get a DNB report, they're going to give you a DNB report on your current invoice customer database. So my point has always been, if I have prospects, and I'm going to add end suppliers and competitors, I report them all as current customers. DNB is not going to know if my competitor is a customer or not. It's to them, it's an EIN number, it's an address, it's a corporate name. In fact, it's not even an EIN number. It's a corporate name and address. They'll run it through their, I might have their DNB number. It's easy to get a DNB number on anybody. So I basically include them in my database. And I basically have a report for my current customers, my newest quote current customers. So the people that I've, don't have a lot of experience with, maybe 90 days or 180 days of experience with, my prospects, my suppliers, and my competitors. And some of you are going to ask, well, why do I care about my prospects? Well, your salespeople are out there doing trials, buying plane tickets, buying dinner, buying football tickets, whatever it takes to try to convince that prospect to become a customer. And the salesman hasn't looked at their credit record, hasn't looked at their financials. So you have to do that. Before you get yourself overly committed into a sales process, emotionally committed, there's a 50-50 chance, and maybe I'm being too harsh today, but a 50-50 chance that if your salesman who's been knocking on the door for 3 years finally gets a chance to sell product for that customer, there's a 50-50 chance that customer has been fired by their current supplier for not paying their bills. And now they're coming to you as an alternative supplier because they're about to be cut off by their first supplier. It might be because the first supplier screwed up and they're not paying their bills, didn't deliver on time. A lot of that's happened in the last year or two. Or it might be because they are out shopping for price and they're going to shop price against you and maybe won't pay your bills on time. So again, salesperson's not going to know that. You have to figure out a way to do that. Credit reports, payment data can help you do that. But a minute ago, you probably scratched your head and say, well, why do I care about my suppliers? So what if you have 2 suppliers and you're growing your business and you have concerns, procurement has concerns that, that one supplier may not be able to supply us as we grow 20 or 30%, or they can't supply us in Ohio, but they can supply us in Eastern Pennsylvania. All of a sudden, I want to know what I know about what I can figure out about my supplier. Their salesperson is always going to tell you they can deliver and meet your quality and delivery requirements. But what if their credit score just dropped by 10 points? Credit score drops from 85, which is acceptable, to 75, you've got a problem. It's a pretty good indicator your supplier's having problems. Could be cash flow problems, could be whatever problems, could be financing problems, but it starts to give you a heads up if you start to see that the supplier's credit score is dropping. Alternatively, if you're looking for alternative suppliers, of course, the salesperson is going to tell procurement whatever they want to hear. Procurement's not going to run a credit report on a supplier. They don't know how to do that. That ought to be the CFO offering to do that on suppliers and potential suppliers. So right there, I've given you a couple of challenges. One is analyze your own data, understand what's driving your own receivables. Number 2 is as you look at that, start to use payment data to understand who's out at 60 or 90 days, who's gotten 30 days slower. You can actually set up reports within payment data providers, again, Dun & Bradstreet or CreditSafe, that allow you to focus on your slow pay or your people getting slower. In other words, tell me all my customers whose credit score has deteriorated 5 or 10% in the last quarter and focus on them. I mean, even if you have thousands of customers, you can stratify your data by new customers, by slow pay customers, by customers whose scores are getting lower, but they haven't started to pay you slowly yet. A lot of ways to use that data analytically. I will suggest that your collection person is not going to drill into this analytical strategic detail. And even your credit manager isn't going to think this strategically. If you have a credit manager that's that good, you have a rare credit manager. But CFOs should think like this. So we've talked about slow pay customers. We've talked about new customers. We've talked about prospects before they become problems, ferret out the problems. And then we've just talked about suppliers. So the last surprise of the day, the best practice is, wouldn't you like to know how your competitors are doing? Are they starting to pay their suppliers more slowly? Do they have a lower credit score to begin with? Do they, are they having cash flow problems from their customers? That might suggest that maybe they're having delivery or quality or false promises problems, or they've got financial cost problems and they just don't have the available cash. You can then start to look into what's going on with that competitor. Again, I've met very few CFOs that do this. And frankly, the workaround is to, if you're working with Dun & Bradstreet, is to include those other parties, the prospects, the suppliers, the competitors, report them as customers, and then you'll get their data. Okay. Keep in mind, D&B can't see whether that competitor owes me money as a customer, or I just want to see that competitor's credit score and their credit history and any notes on that customer. Okay. Alternatively, Credit Safe will build a report out for you. And frankly, Credit Safe is one of our preferred partners. If you want to know more about Credit Safe's offerings and some of the customizable reports they do, I'm going to have a Credit Safe overview up on our website within the next week or so, giving you some insights. And finally, Credit Safe has helped me pull this together today. We're going to have a promotional discount for anybody that comes through the PCS portal and give you a trial and a discount on Credit Safe. I highly recommend you take advantage of that. The last slide just reminds you of how to get in touch, how to find information on our website, how to come through the portal. We tried to make it, again, I'm doing the air quotes, we tried to make it idiot proof for you folks that use these Macs or your phone to get into the website. It should be easier. All else fails, pick up the phone or send me an email. We're glad to chat about payment data and best practices and some of our experience and some of the tools we have. So I'll take a breath. Paul, any questions in the chat room if you've been watching that, or any questions you have because you deal with some of this with your client base?
This has been great as usual. I learn something every time, and I'm running a business myself, and so I'm becoming a better business person in the process. I don't have any questions on this one. That all made sense to me, and I learned some new things. I've checked the chat at this moment. We don't have any questions in the chat. If some come up, I'll let you know, and I'll get this other deck up here.
Okay, great.
And
Paul, thanks for the nice words that you learned
on
something, but you have customers and prospects too, so that's exactly the right answer.
Absolutely.
So while you're bringing slides up for us.
I'm bringing up the second slide deck.
Very good.
It was helpful. Occasionally, if you just let me know where you are on the page that you're on or whatever, that'll be great.
I can't find the deck. There we go. Okay. Okay, we're going to get into Paul's backyard here, and we're going to talk about healthcare. So Paul, get me to slide 2 or slide 3 there.
All right.
Next slide. Okay, so
okay, 3.
Back. There you go. We're going to talk about healthcare costs. Specifically, we're going to talk about prescription drug costs today. But in September, October, and November, I'm going to do 30-minute vignettes on best practices in healthcare. And I'm starting with the elephant in the room that nobody seems to understand, and that's prescription costs. So before we even talk about that, with the assumption that the people in the room are either the financial executive for your employer, and I don't care if you're for-profit or nonprofit, what I'm saying is going to scare the shit out of you. I'll be blunt. I'm going to talk about why being a CFO of a public company is an incredibly stressful job, and it's just as stressful in a privately held company. Again, profit or nonprofit. You are the fiduciary. Which means you are obligated to spend every dollar of your employees' money responsibly and intelligently, and to use your best efforts to spend their money conservatively. Sarbanes-Oxley put some teeth on that by holding you personally responsible if you are lazy or incompetent in doing your job. Sarbanes, most of us worry about Sarbanes-Oxley, which is approaching 20 years, well, it's over 20 years old now, for public companies misleading shareholders. It also applies to private company financial executives, whether you're titled CFO or VP or director or controller. You are the financial executive. By definition, you are the fiduciary with your bank, with your business insurance, with your 401k administrator, with your healthcare provider. In your employees' eyes and in the court's law, you are the fiduciary, and you have to do your job, recognizing that you're responsible for the employee dollars, either through payroll deductions, co-pays, or deductibles. So again, if you have a 401k plan or a pension plan that is overcharging in fees, which means it's taking employees' money out to pay a financial advisor or a mutual fund overhead cost, you should do better. You should know better. Started with pension funds, went to 401ks. For you folks on the call that can't understand why Merrill Lynch no longer wants your 401k business, is because they don't trust that we are good enough to protect their investment. The CFO is a weak link, in a private company 401k plan. The CFO is a weak link. Most private companies don't have investment committees. They don't have investment policies. They invest in the company stock. They invest in artwork. They invest in racehorses. There is more stupid crap I've seen that private companies invest in, and then they get a suit by an employee or a class action suit. And here's the worst thing for those on the call. CFO, the fiduciary, not the CEO, not the owner, not the board of directors. The CFO can be held personally responsible. It doesn't mean that the CEO couldn't overrule you and tell you to buy healthcare from his brother-in-law, to buy it from the guy he plays golf with at the club, to do your 401k banking with his buddy or his brother-in-law. But you have to show on your records you did your job. You reported to the board. You reported to the CEO. You put it in writing. We can find lower expenses, lower risk, better reporting, better support, soft and hard benefits with another vendor than our current vendor, and you recommend the following. You recommend it and they choose not to do it, you have done your job. If you don't do the analysis, do the recommendation, check the alternatives, and actually document stuff, you can be held responsible for treble damages, and they can come after your net worth as a CFO, as a financial executive, as the fiduciary. So you're the named fiduciary. We all know this. Bank reports, insurance reports, 401k administration, no matter who else is on that form, you're on that form as a fiduciary. So when you sign off in fiduciary crap, you are personally exposing your net worth. And I don't think anybody wants to come and tell their spouse why they're being sued and their house and their retirement funds are at risk, because D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance, does not protect incompetent CFOs. It protects incompetent lying VPs of sales. It protects CEOs who are playing too much golf and not watching the store. It doesn't protect you. Again, if you don't know that, start to figure out what a fiduciary does. They will come after your money personally. If you talk to attorneys out there, the first big wave was going after pension funds and 401k advisors. The next fund is going after CFOs who don't pay attention to things like healthcare. So let's go to the next slide. I hope you heard me and you can double check it, but it's not worth the risk. Frankly, I carry several $1 million of personal general liability insurance individually, my name only, to protect me against a suit by employees or former employees. Because I know my company's insurance, and I carry plenty of D&O and general liability insurance on my company, okay? But I separately carry $2 million of liability insurance to put one final wall of defense that I'm an above average CFO taking appropriate steps by documenting stuff like this and doing a fiduciary review, et cetera. But just to make sure If somebody doesn't screw up on my behalf, I pay a couple $100 a year in insurance premiums, to protect my net worth. So that's the sermon from the mountain today, as they say. Let's talk about why did I start a healthcare conversation scaring the hell out of you about fiduciaries? So let's talk about prescriptions. Prescriptions are 1/3 of your spending on healthcare. For a lot of your employees that have maintenance drugs, with high copays, they're over half of their spend. It's not hospital bills. There's a lot of employees and dependents out there spending a couple $1,000s a month on maintenance drugs where their copays are hundreds of dollars, if not $1,000. It's huge to some of your employees. In your whole population base, you may not think drug copays are that high. Talk to some of your employees who are on drugs that they'll never get off, and their specialty drugs, the copays are huge. Okay. For those, not even maintenance drugs are expensive. They're growing double digits every year. Paul, you agree with me, Paul? I mean, 10, 15, 20% on drug bills.
Well, absolutely. The drug business as a subset of healthcare overall, healthcare runs 2 to 2.5x CPI as an entire category. And then if you section out drugs, they grow quicker than that. They increase prices every 6 months. The last 3 times they did it, it was 6 points to 9 points every 6 months. You look at Humira, most commonly prescribed specialty drug. It went from 60,000 in January to 64,200 in June. It'll hit 70,000 in December, and that's not even counting all the blockbuster drugs that are in the pipeline and everything else. So it is definitely the storm cloud on the horizon.
Well, it's a storm. It's the hurricane cell sitting over us, and you're telling me there's another hurricane behind it and another one behind that. Here, let's all do the math. We're all math geeks on this call, or we wouldn't be CFOs or controllers. A 30-year spend is growing 3 to 4 times. Your healthcare is growing 2.5. Let's use Paul's numbers. I agree with him. Drugs are going up 4 times CPI. They're a 30-year spend. How in the hell did you just do a budget, or you're doing a budget right now for 2023, and you're hoping healthcare goes up 8%, 9%? Arithmetically, the drug costs are going to take your weighted average up 9%. We're going to sit here and say, yeah, hospital costs are going up, lab tests are going up, x-rays are going up, all that crap's going up. And somehow 2/3 of the people on this call are going to do their budget and not have a 10% increase in healthcare. They're going to ask their broker and say, well, it went up 8%, 9% last year, but we'll do better this year. We'll go to market, blah, 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 wellness, blah, 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 telehealth. And lo and behold, you got a January 1 renewal, November 10th or so, you're going to get the oh shit letter from your broker showing you 14, 15, 16% this year. And you're going to say, oh my God, we go to market, I got to go fire my broker. Well, the broker's going to fake you out for 2 or 3 weeks. You're not going to have enough time to sign a broker record letter. And oh, by the way, the definition of insanity. Every year I say this, and every year everybody thinks it applies to the other guy on the call, that you're not going to have 15% or 20% renewals. That what happened during COVID won't happen again when you got the big renewals, and you're going to be okay at 9 or 10%, and therefore you're going to stick with your broker because the HR people like the broker. You don't want to deal with the broker and the people complaining about changing carriers, etc. But you'll stick with the broker for 8 years. You'll then decide to go to market. You'll change your broker, you'll change your plan, but you'll go with exactly the same plan you have now. Let's go to the next slide, Paul. Okay, so kind of just covered this. I'm going to bet that you sit here with July actual, year-to-date actuals in front of you, and you haven't analyzed healthcare costs. What did 22 look like compared to 21? Percentage increases. And if you're fortunate, could you understand general maintenance spending, hospital services, operations, et cetera? and healthcare. Can you split it into the three buckets and see if I'm half crazy to see that healthcare isn't growing faster than the others? You may look at a hospital stay and notice you had a NICU baby in there, notice they're very, very high. And frankly, you can probably rationalize some of those are one-timers, some of those are normal. Most of you do not have that analysis sitting in front of you. Most of you did not review that with the board when you reviewed second quarter and year to date. But healthcare is probably your third largest cost in your P&L, and it's the cost that most of us do not understand. So I would challenge you to keep your job. If you didn't understand revenue increases or decreases and pricing, if you didn't understand raw material or labor costs, but somehow we all wave our hands and blow by healthcare costs is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it. And then finally, it's hard enough to analyze versus prior year and understand your actual costs. Trying to explain why you budgeted 9% and you went up 15% is really the definition of insanity, because you didn't have enough detail in your budget to make an educated guess. So now we understand the costs are way the hell up, and you're worried about your budget, or you're even worried about why your costs are high this year compared to what you saw last year. So some of you are going to call your broker and say, why are my costs up? Well, frankly, it's not your broker's job to analyze your performance. Broker's probably going to tell you if you're under a couple of hundred lives, and Paul, correct me where I'm wrong. Broker's probably going to tell you, well, we don't have that information in your plan. You're community rated, the whole market's doing this, get off my back. I can't control the drugs. I can't control the hospital. You had some high cost employees. Your employees are probably going to the emergency room, or they're not using mail order. I'm your broker.
Yeah, if they go above and beyond a little bit, they might produce some benchmarking to convince you you're only doing as bad as everybody else.
Yeah, and I've yet to see that data show up. I've had people wave their hands and tell me the whole market's crazy. Sorry about that.
Right.
Brokers don't work that hard. Okay. I mean, I'll challenge anybody, not you, Paul. Okay, don't get defensive here. How many brokers see you at the end of every quarter with an analysis of your spend and how close that was to the assumptions they made when they priced out your plan? Keep in mind that renewal you get in October is going to be year-to-date June costs, which they had in July. But somehow you can't get that information until they drop it on your lap November 1st or October 15th. And they'll tell you, well, we waited as long as possible to have this year's actuals. They don't need this year's actual. They can do your renewal now. They can shock the hell out of you now, but you don't want to see 18 or 20%, because that gives you time to go put in best practices, hire PCS advisors to actually get you out of you're in the middle of a dark jungle, and you need to get to the sunlight, and you need to get somebody to get you out of the woods and guide you to the sunlight and show you the data. A broker does not work for you. A broker is not your partner. A manufacturer is your enemy. The carrier is your enemy. The broker works for all of them. They get paid by them. They're not your partner. Their job is not to reduce your costs a lot. Their job is to increase your costs just enough so you don't change brokers. So if they can get away with a 15% increase, you bitch and moan and go crazy. They come back at 13.5. You can tell your boss and the employees, I did my best. I really beat them up. We're better. We're less ugly than everybody else at the ugly party. So I did a good job. And Lord help you if you delegate this as CFO, you delegate this to HR or somebody else to go manage the third largest cost in your P&L and the one that exposes your net worth. If you trust HR to manage your personal financial plan, you shouldn't be in charge of the financial plan for the company. So sorry to be harsh, but that is what you get paid to do. Ask yourself this point. Do we have a healthcare benefit plan? Or are we just paying our broker and carrier to administer claims and charge us whatever the hell they want to charge us? I'm going to bet your employees don't consider their healthcare plan a benefit. It's no better than the other competitors out there. They can go to work for somebody else and pay through the nose for a benefit plan, pay a high copay, pay a high payroll deduction, pay a high deductible, and get a narrower and narrower service area and list of providers and have certain drugs not covered, because we're all going to be led to the same point with brokers. As you're looking at a 15, 16, 17% increase, you're going to sit there as CFOs, you're going to make the argument the employees have to bear some part of this. I quote, only budgeted a 10% increase. So we have to find a way to reduce total spending or squeeze that to the employees. Smart employees will figure it out and they'll go walk with their feet. Okay, some will take their spouse off the plan and maybe force their spouse, if he or she is working, or force their kids off your plan. Very few do that because frankly, most of your competitors and the employers of your spouses have crappy plans too. They aren't differentiators. They aren't advantages to working for your firm because you got sold a bill of goods by the broker. So let's go to the next slide. I just walked through this. You only, as a CFO, regardless of what your job description says, I contend, and I've never found a CEO that disagreed with me, wherever risk and resources intersect in a company, wherever, the CFO has to explain why. So if sales, go back to the first topic, if sales lined up some really crappy prospects, rang up the bill and they didn't pay their bills, or they paid their bills late, they were just terrible clients, CFO, how'd you let that happen? Did you run credit reports? Did you do background checks? Did you monitor them? How do we get 90 days on the hole with these deadbeat customers? Try the same thing with a crappy landlord or a crappy supplier. Supplier went broke. How'd you let procurement use a supplier you didn't vet? Not my job. Not a good answer. I always laugh. You can say that. Your successor will do a better job. Okay. I come back to the second part. Healthcare is your responsibility. The lawyers already said you're fiscally responsible to have a good healthcare plan for your employees. So you can blame HR, but the courts are going to hold the CFO responsible if you're squeezing, being irresponsible with copays and deductibles, or definitions of hey, we don't cover Humira, we don't cover Erbitrol and other stuff because we can't afford it. Well, you promised your employees a healthcare plan and you could have done better. Next point, don't rely on your broker. They're using you as a pawn. Brokers, carriers, PBMs, prescription benefit manager firms, they are in bed together. If you haven't figured it out, you've been under a rock. Okay. Same thing when you go to market, the other brokers in town are going to the same carriers. They're going to the same PBMs. It is a monopoly out there. Paul, help me out. How many PBMs are there? CVS, Aetna,
300.
3 of them?
300.
300.
But 3 run the whole retail business. So if you're in a plan, the 3 that add the most waste to the cost of the drug, and I mean by the most, I mean the drug is 2x what it should be and can be had and is being had by other employer plans at the very same pharmacy your employees are likely going to for 1x, same drug, same pharmacy, half the cost. There's 3 that are the biggest offenders in terms of waste that they attach to drugs. It would be CVS, Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optum.
Yep.
And there's a very small number, I mean less than 10 out of the 300, that are genuinely working in the interest of their clients.
I'm glad there's 10. Okay, but the other 3 probably have 90% market share.
5 or 6, yeah.
I don't know if you told me this one day, Paul, or somebody else did, one of your associates. If you're buying insurance from the guy with the most billboards on the highway, you are getting screwed.
Yeah.
If your employees say, hey, let's go to Blue Cross, because they're all over the place. Every hospital takes them. They sponsor my Little League game. They sponsor this. I see their billboards every day. I hear them on the radio. Anybody who has to advertise that much is making too much money out of your wallet, out of your employee's wallet. And sorry to be old and jaded, but I'm old and jaded and I'm a little educated. So let's go to, you have a PBM contract buried through your broker. If anybody out there that tells me you understand your PBM, I want to see your law school degree and I want to see it in the top 10% of the class, because these are written so we cannot understand them. Okay. For example, most PBM contracts, have an obligation to give you information and the analysis and to allow you to audit them. I'll bet nobody on this call has ever tried to audit their PBM because you would never understand it. What you're allowed to audit is a slice of information they select and they do the audit. You don't get the database. You don't get a look. They do an audit and provide it to you, and you have to trust them. It is like working with the IRS. Go try to sue the IRS and go try to have them interpret data your way. It's their data. They use it how they want to, and they control, the big three guys control this. If you don't think this is a conflict of interest, go read a definition of conflict of interest. Okay. An example. And the reason why I chose the topic today is 5 years ago, you had to have 200, 300, 500 employees to get the kind of information, from a advisor like Paul's firm, okay, and the PBMs where you could get that information and start to analyze it. Again, I don't want to know, male, female who took that drug. I don't want to know if it's an employee or dependent. From a HIPAA standpoint, I'm a cold-hearted analytical CFO. I don't want to look at the personal data. Once in a while, I know it's a female issue. Once in a while, I know it's for somebody 60 or 70 years old. Once in a while, I'll know it's for a juvenile. But frankly, we're looking at data. We're analyzing data here like we're analyzing slow pay and prompt pay customers. Again, give me the data so I can analyze it and understand it. You can now work with an advisor and you can start to get PBM contracts that benefit companies as if you're a 500 employee company, which is kind of 1,000 lives or 1,200 lives. You can get that at 30 to 50 employees. You can start to have a PBM contract that you understand and your advisor can help you with, and you can get the data out of it. Once you have the data, you can do the analysis and you can figure out what's best for your employees and your company. If you don't understand rebates, they're making so much money off you, it's unbelievable. Paul, am I still within the guidelines of saying the truth from what I know compared to the 10 or 100 times what you know?
It is hard to exaggerate the amount of waste in this area.
Okay.
I'd say definitely.
Is it safe to say about 20% of the rebates that should go to small employers never get there, that they get sucked into the carriers, the PBM, and the brokers, that they all share in those spoils?
Yes, those funds, the bonus systems that all those different entities or all those different groups benefit from. And in fact, what's really been interesting to me to watch is the fact that these PBMs, the dirtiest PBMs, have 41 ways that they generate revenue off of each prescription potentially. And when you, as employers, have become more and more aware of rebates, they have, the industry has started to write rebate checks to employers depending on their size and the way their plan's set up and how the level of pressure they put on the system to demand them, frankly. But that hasn't slowed down the rate of increase in cost of these of prescription costs in those health plans, because the industry is simply, these PBMs, it's squeezing a balloon. They've said, we're having to write big rebate checks. Let's add money over here. Yeah. And if you do a 24-month rolling look back right now, they've increased their admin fees as an industry 49%. And that number is wildly close to the rebate numbers that are going out. So it takes a lot more, or it takes a lot of work to root that out of a plan, but it can be done.
I'll use this analysis. So for those on the call, my engineering company has 70 employees. 50 of them are unionized. So they're in a Union Cadillac Fleetwood DeVille plan. I can't do jack shit about that. I can't change the Teamsters and how much they charge me for healthcare. And it's egregious. It's criminal what I pay for healthcare. And they don't have any incentive that I see to reduce the healthcare costs, period. Now, for the other 20 employees, Yeah, I'm a pretty small employer. I've got a great healthcare plan by working with an advisor, and therefore I'm somewhat credible in having this conversation today. But I live in a school district where it's part of a consortium of 11 school districts. My school district is the smallest. The school board asked me, "Hey, we've heard you speak on this stuff. Could you help us?" Absolutely. Why are you so confident? I can. There's a lot of waste in there. So long story made short, we're the smallest school district out of 11. The premiums are well over $100 million a year, paid primarily by the taxpayers. The teachers and their spouses pay very little. Over 90% of the spouses and families are on the taxpayer funded plan. And 4 years ago, I got a look at the plan and I saw, and again, this is a huge plan with a huge carrier. And the school consortium has hired a very reputable top 5 benefits advisor to advise the school board consortium. So they have their own advisor. I'll say somebody, a firm like Paul's, but very, very large, publicly traded advisory firm. You could almost guess the name, who works for the school board in the consortium. And then they go up against the broker and the carrier. Found out that their rebates were $17 million a year. Never disclosed to the consortium. Keep in mind, the rebates were about, I don't know, 10 or 11% of the total bill were rebates. They didn't get a penny of it. I tried to explain to them why those rebates belong back to them and their employees. With full recognition, part of those rebates do pay for the costs of the PBM doing their job. I contend the carrier doesn't deserve 1 penny of those rebates, and the broker sure as hell doesn't. Broker's already getting paid 3 or 4 different ways.
Right.
So literally 6 months later, the CFO, our little school district, asked me to come to a school board budget meeting. And he was so glad that they had negotiated to get 1/3 of the 17 million, that this consortium got $5 million back. And keep in mind, their total spend went from 120 to 150 million a year. So he got change out of the cushions of 3%.
Wow.
And his name's Zach. I said, "Zach, congratulations. You started to crack the vault. Why didn't you deserve 75% instead of 30%? I said, "You now went from an F to a D on a performance scale. I give you credit. You barely passed, and you broke the curve, and you studied and you worked. Why did you think 30% was a generous settlement?" And he looked at me and said, "You're like the toughest guy in the world." I said, "No, I'm following the money. You should get 10 to 12 million of that, and you settled for 5." So it can be done, folks. Yeah. A point I'll have is, because of guys like us, advisors like Paul, some good lawyers out there, which is kind of an oxymoron, actually working for us. PBM regulations have become more transparent. There are regulations in certain states where you can get more information. So don't take no for an answer from your broker. Demand that they give you the information. Put his or her nose into the legislation for your state. But there's a short answer to all this. CFOs can never understand healthcare as well as an advisor. Just like you can't understand banking as well as your banker, but you get a banker you trust that shares the information. And the banks, there's a little more competition in banks because you know the cost of money, you know term sheets, you can compare those. You can't compare PBM contracts and all kinds of healthcare contracts. It's a full-time job for experts. The short answer is you need an advisor on your side of the table. And I'll speak for Paul here, and you can correct me. You can let Paul be the bad guy and interface with the broker, represent you, negotiate, be a hard ass, or you can have Paul sitting in your back pocket, prepping you for the meeting, reviewing your data, asking the right questions. And in between is Paul sitting at the table. He's not a friend of the brokers. He's not a friend of the carriers. They don't like when he shows up on my side of the table, but they got to respect him because he works for me, not for them. And it makes a huge difference. So end of the story is they outnumber us. They work together against us. They hide information. They hide legislation from us. They kind of sort of lie using data to us. Okay, because they can pick the audit points and the audit data if you're even smart enough to ask for an audit, and if you're smart enough to make sure you have audit rights. I mean, frankly, audit rights are damn near useless in a PBM contract because they're gonna do the audit the way they want, and they're gonna show you what they want to show you. So it's kind of like asking the budget committee to prove to us that the Inflation Reduction Act is really going to reduce inflation. If you believe that, give me a call. I want to hear your political views and I want to see your economic analysis. Okay. So kind of at a point to say, period, full stop. If you keep doing what you've been doing, using your broker, getting surprised November 15th, you're another data point in the definition of insanity. Sorry to be blunt, sorry to be objective, but I learned this the hard way, and I'm trying to share these best practices with you. What do you think, Paul? Was that between the lines?
Yep, I love it. I've got
Your last slide. Get an advisor tomorrow. Figure out if you want them to coach you, lead it, or in between. You pay them on performance. It's a win-win-win. The company wins, your employees win, and you win from a standpoint of doing the right thing as a fiduciary and being a strategic, proactive executive. It's going to take you several years. I think it's very, very reasonable. If you're 80% of the fully insured small companies in this country, very reasonable, reduce your cost 25% within the next 3 years. But keep in mind that I'm talking about a real reduction. So let's do the arithmetic. You're currently spending $1 million. You're gonna get a 20% increase. So you're gonna spend $1.2 million. I'm saying in 3 years, you should be at $750,000. So it's not a 25% one-time reduction, which is huge and your third largest spend item, but it's $750,000 compared to $1.2 million. And then you're gonna get your increases down. My increase this year was 6 or 7%. Last year it was 5%. Okay, because I work with an advisor and I'm pretty frugal. I'm pretty passionate. Here's the fact, and here's true story that our employees have a zero copay, zero deductible plan. Yet I've been able to reduce healthcare costs by over 40% in real terms. I'll finish with this. 9 years ago, when we bought the company, we were paying $450,000 for a bronze plan for 21 employees. Last year, our premium was $83,000 for 2 fewer employees. So forget the data count of 10% fewer employees. Our premium it was at $83,000 a year. And our self-insurance expense was $88,000 a year. My total all in was $171,000. And my employees pay a payroll deduction. They pay no copay or no deductible for them and their dependents. We had the best healthcare plan in our industry. And the final testimony of that is I've had extremely low turnover in the last 4 years since we basically gave them free healthcare. And I no longer use recruiters or Indeed or Career Builder ads, because I have 2 resumes for every position in our company of people who want to work for our company, and primarily because our healthcare plan is so good.
Amen.
Thank you. Amen's the right answer. That's what our employees say. So continuing to do what you've been doing is the definition of insanity. I have a little note on my calendar. Half the people you encounter today will be below average. Try to work with the top half. So get yourself out of the below average because you don't know better, because you keep trusting your broker. You like that one, Paul?
That's great.
Statistically, half the people.
I'll give you credit the first time I use it. After that, I knew a guy. After that, it's mine.
Okay, fair enough. Send me $1. I'll send you the rights. So backing all this up are 3 phenomenal presentations. I didn't do them. I can brag on smart partners. Three phenomenal explanations on PBMs, how they work, how they screw you, what the best practices are. And Paul and his team can explain those to you because I got them from Paul. It is worthwhile reading. They're posted up on our site. Probably as of today, these slides, those decks will all be up by the weekend. And if you have any questions, reach out to me or reach out to Paul. I'm losing my voice, Paul. I think I'm right on 4 o'clock. So
You did a good job.
I think we did another fast and loose summary of best practices.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Gary. This was great. Both topics were fantastic. I'll tell you, I'll take 30 seconds to share one story and hit the stop button. I had the opportunity to do what you talked about a second ago. I went to lunch with the CFO of a large medical practice, about 900 people on their plan, 500 employees, 900 including dependents. He asked me to go to lunch. He found out what I do and saw a news clip or something and reached out to me. So I went out to lunch with him and his broker and his prior broker.
Oh,
Because he told them that I said there was at least $1 million of waste in his plan, and they didn't believe it. And at the end of, after they purchased me lunch, they had to acknowledge that it sounds like there's a lot more waste than they even realized in their business, and they didn't really know that much about all of this stuff. And they worked for one of the big 5 brokerage firms in this country. So we're getting engaged to do an analysis and guaranteeing those results, or we're going to work for free, which doesn't happen. So it happens every day. And I think employers, the optimism I have about this whole healthcare situation in America is that good CFOs are the solution to healthcare in this country.
I agree with that 100%.
And you can't just print more money to pay for something that's unreasonable. You have to dig in, whereas the other payers don't.
We used it, and we're over the time, but we used it as a way to reward our employees, to thank our employees. I'm one of the owners, so it was my money when we decided to self-fund the copay and deductibles. We thought it was the right thing to do. Our employees were ecstatic. You've heard this story before. We did that on November 1st, 4 years ago. We always had a cost of living general salary increase on January 1st, coincided with the union wage increase. Okay. We announced this November 1st. It was a 15-minute renewal discussion with our advisor. Employees left smiling, hanging around. It was like the best benefit and renewal meeting you ever had. Nobody had to call their wife and tell them to change doctors and increase their budget. Everybody was happy. You know, our advisor was smiling because he didn't come in and get yelled at. And 3 weeks later, and I'm the CFO of the company. I also run one of the business units. Each one of our division heads came into me and said, "You guys are so great to work with. This is such a big deal in healthcare and eliminating the exposure. Some of our employees will really benefit. Hopefully I won't." Every employee in the company has voted unanimously to forego the 3 or 4% wage increase because you took this nightmare off their back. So we incurred $88,000 to self-insure deductibles and copays. Our stop loss was $115,000. It saved us over $200,000 of annual salary increases, and we bought it for $88,000, and we bought their goodwill. It's understanding insurance and probabilities, but even if it had cost us $200,000, we bought their goodwill. But the employees were so thankful that they walked in and gave up a cost of living increase.
Awesome.
And you can't make that shit up.
No, that's fantastic.
I didn't believe it. My partner didn't believe it. The board didn't believe it. And I looked over at my CEO, who is my partner, and I gave him total credit for my idea. Mom didn't raise a fool. I made him look like a genius. So with that, I will suggest that's what other CFOs should do, and that you guys can help them. So Paul,
thanks very much for your
in 6
time,
months
Gary.
or a year, give us a report out on how much of that million you found. We'll put that as a follow-up. Okay.
No, absolutely. We'll know in the next 30 to 45 days.
We'll send out the topics for next month. There will be a healthcare topic on that, continuing this conversation.
Thanks again. Have a great time.
Adios.
And
Take
thanks
care.
everyone for your attendance. Hope we provided value.